survived. To your chagrin, I did.
Well, because we went to school together, Kevin made it.
Really?
Well, it's one still three, so it's not one kid Scott. How are you? I don't know who you're talking about.
I don't know whether it's my preaching or bad batteries, but that clock is hot on batteries. All right, be turning to Joshua chapter 1. I hope you all have had a great day with this weather. It is gorgeous. Tonight from... Hey, Jimmy, there's a battery up there if you want to change it in that clock. I don't know whether you take... That clock is the hardest on batteries I've ever seen. But there's a battery right there on the frame. All right, our announcements for tonight. Raine Lewis will go in for carpal tunnel syndrome surgery tomorrow. Nora Taylor has gone home from the rehab, but she's still having dialysis 3 days a week. Our Sarah will go in for sinus surgery on Friday. And because of that, the church office is going to be closed next week. Steady Climbers and Golden Ages will have a game night Friday night, the 18th at 6 o'clock. Bring finger food to share. There's a table set up for little baby Ryder. Thursday Bible School is looking for volunteers for the 22-23 year. Quilting Ladies will meet on Wednesday, the 23rd. The youth group will meet at my house, our house, the 27th after worship. Ladies' Tea. And the Ladies' Tea, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a time where the ladies get together and the ladies from, or the girls from leaderettes, lads and leaderettes, give their speeches and so forth. Cornerstone will have a game night on Friday, April the 1st at 6 o'clock. Lads to Leaders at Home Convention will be April the 9th. Everyone is invited, and I would encourage you to come and support our kiddos. And the Lads to Leaders Convention this year will be at Little Rock, the 14th through the 17th. Tonight from the book of Joshua chapter 1 and verse 2, what I want to talk about is the courage or the goal of living a Christian life. What we seem to be more content with than anything else is living safely until we die. When you stop and you think and we emphasize the death of Jesus Christ, the death of Christ without what is worthless?
Resurrection.
The resurrection. God didn't take Christ to the cross. He brought him out of the grave, and that's the victory that we have. But we seem to have a tendency to just be safe. When God spoke to Moses at the burning bush, you remember what he said?
I don't have the ability to do that. Send somebody else.
I don't have the ability. Get someone else. But I want you to think about the book of Joshua is not just about facts. And it's not about Old Testament history per se. It has a deeper meaning in there if we can get down a little bit. But the whole story of the book of Joshua is a promise that was made to Moses concerning all of the Israelites. God heard the agony and the crying of his children 380 some odd years in captivity. They were slaves. And he heard their cry and he told Moses, I'm going to bring you out of the land of suffering. Then what did he say?
What did Moses say, or what did God say?
What did God say to Moses? What we seem to remember is the only fact was that God brought Israel out of Egypt. And the purpose has got to be, the question's got to be asked, what's the purpose of that?
Take them to the promised land.
The excuse was to go worship on the mountain, though, right?
Do what?
Worship on the mountain.
Worship on the
Isn't that
mountain.
what Moses told Pharaoh at the very first? I need to take my people to go worship on the mountain.
Yeah. And of course, you know, though, that story is another. He said go, and then he recanted, no, you can't go. You can't take your children, you can't take your animals. And Moses, how are we going to make sacrifices? How are our families going to worship God? And he recanted on that, and God brought about his death and the death of the firstborn. Anything that broke the womb, animal, human. But he says, I'm bringing you out, and the sentence doesn't stop there, so that I can bring you in to the land of Canaan. And because of brethren, a lot of the songs that we sing, they're just not correct. When you think of the land of Canaan, according to hymnology or the songs that we sing, what does Canaan represent? Rest. We know what Jordan represents. One is death. When we think of Jericho, we think of death, and we think of the land of Canaan. And our hymns back this up. The land of Canaan was not particularly a place of rest. Who was in Canaan?
That would be the Canaanites.
Canaanites, made up of the worst enemies that Israel ever saw. And each one having a false god, two of them to which they offered babies to be burned. And so when they looked at Canaan, God said, I have given it, I brought you out to bring you in. I give you this land, but you have to do what?
Take it.
You have to take it. And so as they looked in there, Canaan was not a representation of heaven. It was a place of war and fighting. Have you ever heard the analogy of what each of the symbols in the temple represent in the New Testament? They take each article and they say it represents this in the New Testament. The Bible doesn't say that. We made that analogy. We made that comparison. We drew the two pictures together. And so we've got to be careful. The candlesticks, the Lord's Supper. Where do we get that from? We heard it, we accepted it, it sounded good, and so it became fact. And so as we go back to the book of Joshua, you see that this book, and when you think of a book, what do you think about? What would Moses be carrying? What would Israel have beside the Ark of the Covenant.
Tablets of stone.
It would be papyrus, which is what?
Plant-based.
Like a flax that's beaten out, smooth, and then they would write on it. A book is also, and really a book is anything that contains those words, all words. You have vellum, which was usually sheepskin, and it was scraped. It lasted a lot longer than papyrus or the reed, and they would write on that. But a spined book was foreign to them. Stone, clay. And so we have the book of the law, to which God said, in the days of Moses, they were faithful. They didn't go to the left, they didn't go to the right. And as long as that happens, I will fight your fights. I will give you the victory. And this is where Christians ought to be living. And when we go into the world and we see our enemy, through God, they have been conquered, and we ought to be living a victorious life. But how do we usually handle it? I had one lady in Florida, while sitting there waiting for her mother to die, looked at me and she said, Mike, if you can solve your problems with money, you don't have a problem. Mother dying of cancer, could not fix it. And so when Christians face difficulty and battles, how do we accept it? What's our normal attitude?
I don't know that we have a normal attitude, but I know we bounce back and forth between sides a lot on our way down the middle.
Mm-hmm. Woe unto me. And if we get a break in it, God's working in it. If things deteriorate, where is God? And so they were given a book of success, a book of victory, a story of victory. When we think about Shittim, it was kind of the dropping off point of the spies. But Shittim was also the place where God's children started following foreign gods. Now, when you think about spies, what do you think about?
James Bond.
James Bond. What do you think this,
About James Bond when they think about spies? That's what I thought.
with oil that comes out of the back of his car, machine guns, what do you think about, why would spies go into the land? Find out what now? All right, to look for their weaknesses, which would be found in what? How many of you have driven from like here to Phoenix, Arizona or Tucson? And you're up here, and you're not on the top of the mountains, but you're up here on the ridges with the interstate, and there's nothing until you drop off. And your towns and your cities are in the lowest place. Why? Water. And so you'd have spies. It was like anything. If they could cut off the supply, they were about guaranteed victory. So they would look at the soldiers, they would look at armor, they would look at the supplies that they could see. Man, they were especially looking for water to see how they could cut that off. And so the spies were sent into the land. And each one of these cities, especially if it was fortified, would have a gate. the most superior in the armed forces was given the charge of closing that gate every night. When you think about a walled city, you don't think about Jericho having houses in the wall, and usually 2 houses back to back. And this, of course, is where who lived? Rahab. Now, let's talk about Rahab a minute. What do you think about when you think about Rahab?
She's the one that hid the spies?
She's what?
Isn't she the one that hid the spies?
Yeah. What else do you think about her? The what? A harlot. And man, as these kids were going through, I want to put all the kids and the lads to leaders, I'm talking about Ben's age and Colin's age, they're going through the book of Joshua. Number one, half the words they use, these kids do not understand. I don't know who puts them together. But they kept talking about, what was Rahab? And of course they all said she was a harlot. And I thought, are they going to go home and ask their parents, what's a harlot? What, she dropped out the window? But when you think about Rahab, and Rahab is the one who makes that statement, we saw you coming. And the false gods that they had were responsible for the weather, for victory, for blessing the weapons that they used. But here, Rahab makes the statement, if you start in chapter 2 and in verse 1, and Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, go view the land, especially Jericho. Jericho was blessed because it was in the plains. A lot of water, a lot of prosperous sessions there. And so they went to the house of the prostitute, whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. And it was told to the king of Jericho, behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. And then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, bring out the men. And so you have, someone has informed the king that Rahab had these spies. And it was Rahab who said to these spies, we knew you were coming. We got a report of the drying up of the Jordan River. We've got a report of the victory that you've had. We know that the God of heaven and earth is on your side. And she said, we have lost heart. She knew that they were going to be defeated before Israel knew that they were going to be victorious, because of the report that they had. And Rahab makes that statement and talks about the God of heaven. Now turn over, if you will, to the book of Isaiah chapter 30. Now you remember that the gate being closed at nighttime. In Matthew chapter 24 and in verse 20, the flight of Israel out of Jerusalem, God through Matthew says, I hope that your flight or your escape, Matthew 24, verse 20, is not during the winter, that it's not on the Sabbath, that a woman is not pregnant, nor does she have a child with suck. The Sabbath, the gate was locked. At night, the gate was locked. And so you think about Rahab living up in this wall. But I also want you to notice that nowhere in there does Rahab say, all right, I've given up my gods. I've given up my beliefs. But what do we know about Rahab? Someone read Isaiah chapter 30, verses 1 through 7.
Woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel but not of me, and that cover with the covering but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin. That walk to go down into Egypt, and have not asked at my mouth to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to trust in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame, and the trust in the shadow of Egypt your confusion. For his princes were at Zoan, and his ambassadors came to Hanes. They were all ashamed of a people that could not profit them, nor be a help nor profit, but a shame, and also a reproach. The burden of the beasts of the south, and the land of trouble and anguish, from whence come the young and an old lion, the viper and fiery flying serpent. They will carry their riches upon the shoulders of young asses, and their treasures on the bunches of camels, to a people that shall not profit them. For the Egyptians shall help in vain, and to no purpose. Therefore have I cried concerning this, their strength is to sit still. Now go, write it before them in a table, and note it in a book, that it may be for the time to come forever and ever. That this is a rebellious people, lying children, children that will not hear the law of the Lord. How far?
That's good. So you see there that Egypt is an enemy. In the book of Psalms, chapter 89, verse 10, the psalmist there says, you crushed Rahab like a carcass. You scattered her enemies with your mighty arm. I thought Rahab was the prostitute. And yet the psalmist talks about tearing Rahab apart.
You know, in my version of Isaiah 30, verse 7 says, for the Egyptians shall help in vain, to no purpose, therefore I have called her Rahab whom Shebeth.
All right. So Rahab is associated with, or the name anyway, of rebellion. Rahab, the harlot, was named after Rahab the goddess. Most of the time in the troubling of water or anything about water has to do with the goddess Rahab. So not only was Rahab a prostitute, she was the follower, and I've read commentaries that said that holy and harlot are almost the same. I think God knows the difference in the wording, and he uses the word harlot, not holy. She was not a holy woman, she was a harlot. Beautiful story of who God can use. And so there in Psalms 89, he tears her, the goddess of the water, apart. So Rahab was named after rebellion. She was named after a goddess. She had foreign gods. And yet in the book of Matthew, chapter 1, and in verse 5, you have Solomon of the tribe of Judah, the mother of Boaz. And then he goes on, he talks about the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Matthew was talking to high-end Jewish leaders. One thing that was never done is a woman mentioned in genealogy. the father of, the son of. And here Matthew, and it's almost like he's digging at them. What do we know about Tamar? Here are the 4 women that he mentions. Tamar was raped by her half-brother. Then you have Ruth. And then you have Rahab. And then you have, not even given a name, Uriah's wife, which was Bathsheba. Rahab the harlot is mentioned to the high Jews as being in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And so God brings Israel out to bring them in. That's his purpose. It wasn't just to bring them out. It was to bring them in. Why 40 years?
Allow a generation to die off.
Why?
So they didn't do exactly what he said.
All right, and be careful how we read that. Joshua and Caleb were of that generation and they survived, but also look at the tribe of Levite. The tribe of Levi is mentioned there. And so for 40 years, what were they doing? Wandering. It's almost like every time they complained, God said, all right, another lap around the mountain. It was by no means the shortest. Should have taken 11 days. These people for 380 to 82 years had been slaves. God was bringing them out and taking them into the land of Canaan where their enemies were. They knew nothing about fighting. And so God was preparing not for the taking out, but for the bringing in. So the Christian, we have enemies. For how long?
So what? I don't understand the question.
How long do we have enemies?
Our lifetime.
A lifetime. Revelation 2 verse 10. We're told, blessed are those that are faithful unto. Unto does not mean until we die. Be thou faithful. Have a faith that leads you to death, is what Revelation 2:10 is saying. When I was younger, I wondered, do older people have this much difficulty with temptation and trials? I thought the older you got, the easier it would be. Is that how it works? Do what? Different temptations.
You have more practice.
More practice.
I mean, you should get better as you get older.
It should be. And has there ever been a case where maybe someone did something and you thought to yourself, that would never be my temptation, only to find out maybe it was? Have you ever been there? I have. And part of it is not just the temptation, it is the conceit that we have. But many times what we do, and what Joshua was talking about, you are always going to be surrounded by enemies. But if you do a reading in chapter 1 and chapter 2, you'll always find, God said, I'll be in front of you, I'll be behind you. I've given you the land. Every foot that your foot steps on, I've already given it to you. Go take it. And you've got some Christians that, man, they've got that victorious, that conquering faith. And then I read in one book that old used demons is who the devil sends to some Christians. Some people are victorious. Some people get defeated. They've been led out of the world, but they have not been led into a victorious Christian life. And that's what we ought to be living in, knowing that we're going to make it. And we read last week from the Ephesians and from Hebrews, especially 3 and 4, the victory that God had given given us, that in Christ Jesus we are blessed with promises, and we ought to stand on those promises. Not a matter of earning, it's not a matter of working, even though the two are not mutually exclusive, but God has already done for us. And we are His children. And so, our faith ought to challenge us. I want to say something. I don't want anyone to take this wrong. But there are some people that have social anxiety. They have difficulty being around people. And they take their medicine, or they suffer from depression. They take their medicine. But I wonder sometimes, do we ever take it to Jesus? And I have been clawed. My face has been clawed baptizing a woman. And she didn't tell me until she hit the water that she was terrified of it. And she clawed my face. And so to the next person that told me that, I said, let's take a minute and let's take it to Jesus. God is not going to ask us to do anything that He does not empower us. Take it to Jesus. God, I know I need to be with the brethren. I have difficulty with it. I have this anxiety that just ties me in knots. Lord, would you help me for that hour? I wonder what the Lord would do. What's your thinking?
Can't hurt.
Can't hurt? Do what? Ask and you'll receive. But to a person who suffers those sort of problems, is that a battle? Sure it is.
I believe if you expect Him to do something after you ask Him once about stuff like that, I'm not sure it would be. I think it's something that you have to learn after for a while.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I wouldn't say it's easy. I mean, it's easier for me because that's not my problem. I can go into a crowd, I can go to 1 and 2, or I can be by myself. But what I am saying is, I wonder if God, if we would take it to the Lord and do it seriously, what He would do for us to help conquer that part of our lives.
People don't believe this when I say it, but I used to be really bashful.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually, it took me a long time to get where I wasn't. And I believe God did a lot of that.
Okay.
Maybe somebody else stepped in too, but.
And there are degrees, obviously, of these types of problems. In the book of Genesis, chapter 14, and the Lord talks to Abraham after Lot had separated. Abraham, you look to the north, and you look to the south, you look to the east, and you look to the west. Everywhere your eye can see, I'm going to give you. There was the promise. I will make your children like the sand of the sea. I'll make them like the stars of the night. He made a promise, and He fulfilled that promise. And many times we have a problem with time. All right, in the book of Romans 8 and verse 30, moreover, whom He did predestinate, them He also called. And whom he called, he also justified. And whom he justified, he also glorified. What does the word predestinate mean?
What is it as plan? But it's not specific.
There's a preordained plan. That preordained plan of God was for us to be called. God calls us. Whom he called, he also justified. What does the word justified mean?
Shown to be correct.
To be correct. Let me give you some easy illustrations. Number one, fellowship means fellows in the same ship. And so if you rock the boat, who's affected by it? Everybody. Justified. Just as if I'd never done it. God takes you back to a position before that sin was ever committed. And so, what we learn from the book of Joshua is that Christians are meant to live a victorious life, a life of courage. When we see our problems, think about Moses, think about Joshua, think about looking out there at the enemy, and even though they had to take the land, they had to fight for it, victory was given.
Do you think sometimes, Mike, that we live our lives with an attitude of penance? My life is going this way because of what I've done before, and this is just God reminding me that I should be better. And we don't ask for help because we feel like it's punishment. I don't know how to really explain it, but we go through our lives accepting the bad or the ill or the things that stretch us the wrong way as penance or the price we had to pay for what we've done before.
Okay,
It's that negates the justification, but I think we can do that. We can live our lives like
we live a life of penance because we believe we're being punished for events in the past. I remember coming home as a kid. You remember the old rolling skates that had the metal wheels? And they had the key, and when you wind the key, it would tighten up. And I saw them in a yard, and I stole them. My mother made me take them back, and I forget what it was, but something happened to me, and that was the first thought I had, John. I'm being punished. You go back to people like Miriam. Miriam and Aaron murmured against Moses because he had married Zipporah the Cushite. He had married an African. And she becomes leprous. And Moses said, Lord, forgive her. And she takes the hand out and so on and so forth. Leprosy is one disease in the Bible that is associated with sin. It is the only one. But we have the tendency, because of stories like Miriam, when they came to Job, what have you done wrong to God? And we still have that today.
Well, there are religions that are based on that. What they call now eternal salvation. We used to say once saved, always saved. They believe that our punishment is on earth for a lot of our sins.
I believe that we can relate to a lot of things like that. We make that correlation. We join them together. I do believe that if we're going to reap what we sow. Alabama has the deal, you get your comeuppance. Rather thing. You've got some of the most ungodly people that have destroyed other people's lives that will go to their grave not having recompense for it. God has not punished them. And you've got Christians, it seems like every hand that's dealt to them is a bad hand. They just never get a break. And that's their thinking, what have I done wrong?
Well, I think there is a correlation between what you sow and what you reap, but it's not God-given. It's because we set things up to happen the way they happen.
Mm-hmm.
It bears back to everything that we've been given is that for God is good. What do we make of it?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we make bad of it. So.
Yeah, what goes around comes around, karma. Sometimes people get their comeuppance. The bird comes home to roost. Sometimes they don't. But we just have the natural tendency to bring God in because of some maybe of the wrong conclusions we've made about God. God does not give you cancer to wake you up. Can we learn lessons from cancer? Goodness gracious. I mean, one day you are healthy, and the next day you get that judgment from the doctor. You got stage 4, Donna's daddy. You got stage 4 cancer. Nothing we can do. Not a thing. Can we learn from that? See, my deal about those who say, well, the Lord's coming, the Lord's coming, it doesn't bother me at all when he comes. There's just one thing that counts, and that is being ready.
We actually have to watch out, too, because I've heard people say there's evil men that are really rich and living a great life, but we don't really know their lives, what they have in there that's bad. All we see is the good side.
His money cannot buy him peace of mind. It cannot buy him health. It cannot pay for a happy marriage, and it cannot pay for the respect of children. I got a desire when I go to heaven that my children are going to follow me. That's a great desire that I have. And money cannot do that. A lifestyle of winning victories. Any thoughts, any questions? Next week, we are going to deal from Joshua 1 verse 9. And we're going to look at the men or the man that God chose. If you're writing about, I heard a preacher talk about Rahab. From a shady lady to the halls of fame was his sermon of who God can use in his service. And so we're going to be looking at the man God used. After that, we're going to look at counting the cost. Donna today, I had to take her back, and that's why she's not here. She's had trouble with the second cataract surgery. It was just a different procedure, and today they put a Band-Aid on her eyeball. They call it a Band-Aid, but it's clear. She can see through it, and it will dissolve. And she said, well, where do you want to eat lunch? And I said, well, it needs to be quick because I've got to get back. I said, I've got work to do. And she kind of smiled, I think, and said, well, I'm sorry that I'm such an inconvenience. That's not what I meant. She then went into Target to get some medicine, and I said, don't be all day. She said, have you ever known me to be all day? I said, yeah. I've waited for hours for her to come out of Walmart. She doesn't like it that I don't go in. There's nothing in there that, but for some reason, ladies like their husband to go in the store.
She likes it when I stay in the car. It's just an open book to stay as long as she wants.
Yeah.
And she
So
don't
that's
answer
where,
her phone either.
that's where Donna is tonight, and it also lets you know words. You got to be careful with them. Could have I rephrased to Donna don't take all day, or I've got something else that I need to be doing. Yeah. 46 years, I'm learning some things. It's kind of slow, but I'm getting there. I may teach a man's class. All right, appreciate your attention. Thank you, Jimmy.
That's actually how, I use humor to get past my shyness, but when I was younger, I used smart aleck remarks most of the time to get past it. And I learned that didn't work very well. So.
You do, and another thing is,
those pretty eyes. Isn't that cute? She's got good hair finger foods to keep them green. Finger foods are you bringing, right? You coming again today? Yes. We're coming if Andrew, our son, doesn't come in from here. I've never made it. Take like chicken cornbread mix, put it in muffins.